On this tape, you will see demonstrations of Symbolics PaintAmation for high-end paint, 2D animation, and automation, and Symbolics XL Animation, which unifies PaintAmation with high-end 3D animation capabilities. But first, a brief introduction to Symbolics Unified Graphics production environment. Symbolics XL Animation, the unified graphics environment for the 90s. Combining powerful paint, 2D animation, automation, and high-end 3D animation. With outputs in NTSC, PAL, HDTV, as well as film and print. Symbolics delivers a competitive edge for a demanding marketplace. Paint and 2D animation are unified in Symbolics PaintAmation. 2D animation allows the affordable production of animated sequences entirely within the Symbolics environment. Intricate, stylized, dramatic. Automation speeds up repetitive processes like ink and paint, and rotoscoping. Complete 2D sequences from start to finish on a single machine. Symbolics keeps costly post-production time in check. The seamless integration of 2D and 3D gives Symbolics XL Animation unrivaled versatility. Long recognized for its high-end 3D animation, Symbolics modeling, animation, and rendering tools give the graphic artist a full measure of creative control. Symbolics character animation can deliver surprising expressiveness, uncanny realism, or create alternate realities. Its powerful paint program yields unparalleled control of 3D surfaces. Symbolic speed puts its 3D work on target with the commercial market. Displacement animation combined with precise high-resolution retouching allows a transparent integration of real-life imagery with 3D graphics.
Pump and Spray, neu von Shampoo. Das bringt Spannkraft, die lange hält. Da ist so wenig, so viel. Pump and Spray.
18.
.2D animation of surface maps on 3D objects can accelerate production of high-end work, but more importantly, it can fuel the creation of striking new looks.
It was a really important animation. I think that it was the most important animation in Italy of the 1990s.
Graphic artist Luca Pisati had a tight deadline for an intro to the world's most popular sporting event. His solution, animated 2D surfaces in a 3D environment.
This way of trying to mix the painted things with the 3D environment was a quite cheap way of having a good and strange animation in really few time.
Symbolics delivers hot new looks in record time. The unification of output formats has given Symbolics a global presence, supporting video output in NTSC, PAL, and HDTV, as well as motion picture film and print. Symbolics is the unchallenged leader in delivering graphic images in any medium to markets around the world. High-res print output simplifies coordinated ad campaigns.
You can call in stills from TV shows or photographs or anything, and you can compose the whole thing in the machine in high resolution. And you can send it off the printer and there it is, all done. I mean, this is like a magnificent thing to my way of thinking.
High-res output to film delivers computer animation to the silver screen. And with an eye to the expanding markets of the future, Symbolics XL animation provides HDTV capability today. Symbolics format independence allows you to work in NTSC in the morning and HDTV in the afternoon. You can bid on HDTV projects without the risky purchase of specialized hardware.
Part of our philosophy of format independence and a very flexible, programmable system, both hardware and software-wise, that lets you, our user, get your feet wet, is you can grow. And you can do it as your business grows, and you can afford to take the chance and take the risk. What we do is we try to lower the risk for you.
Symbolics, the first name in unified graphic systems. And now, a close look at Symbolics PaintAmation, a powerful unified environment for 2D paint, animation, and automation. Symbolics artist Ken Brain brings years of design experience to the Symbolics workstation. His graphics for CBS News weave together literally dozens of 2D and 3D animation techniques. He used Symbolics' high-resolution capabilities to create sequences for the Jetsons, the animated feature film. His work speaks for itself. In this program, he speaks for Symbolics and its potent new graphic system.
I'm going to start by showing you PaintAmation, Symbolics' 2D paint program, and show you some of the features that I think make it the powerful program that it is. For any paint program to be considered high-end, however, there are certain things that it has to be able to do, certain basics. Here I'm painting with a gradient, in this case a 4-color gradient. The system has to support a variety of brushes. Here I'm selecting an airbrush. Speed and smoothness is critical to a high-end paintbrush. With the new Symbolics hardware, there's a wonderful feel to these brushes now. This is an airbrush and I've got a pressure-sensitive pen. A variety of brushes are available, so in addition to large and smooth brushes, you might want small, very fine-looking anti-aliased brushes, and so we have support for those as well. Text is another thing that is used extensively in painting 2D graphics, and so Symbolics has a variety of support for those as well. We use bitstream fonts, so there's a library of over 500. These fonts are easy to move around, position, and scale on the screen, and can also be used with drop shadows. I've shown you some of the basics that the Symbolics does very well. What really sets it apart and makes it unique, though, I think, is the diversity of things that it can do. I really like the ability as an artist to create my own brushes, and so cutout brushes are a classic thing in the Symbolics environment that allow the artist to create their own brushes, and there's virtually an infinite variety that you can create. Here on the screen I've just painted kind of this squiggly line and then picked it up from the canvas as a brush, and the idea is that I create a brush like this because of kind of the effect that it produces when you paint with it. All right. Now, I could, if I wanted, probably produce the same look eventually with an airbrush, but this is a real good example of how a sophisticated tool, or in this case a sophisticated brush, allows me to create this look much more quickly than I could ever do it with an airbrush. Now, there are other types of unique brushes within this environment as well, though. Blending brush is another example of something very unique. To show you what this really does here, I'm just going to put some color down at the bottom of the screen. All right. And what the blending brush does actually is it mixes colors. All right, so it picks up colors that you go over and drags them along with it. So in this way I can kind of blend the yellow and the red together to make it look a little bit like fire. Up here I can just blend these colors around to make it look more like a swirly cloud.
The roster of brushes in PaintAmation is more than extensive. In fact, it is limited only by the imagination of the artist. A cutout brush, for example, can be made of literally any shape or image, drawn, 3D rendered, or scanned in. This is a live texture brush, one of an entirely new class of brushes offered by PaintAmation. The cluster of moving dots near the center of the screen is a live texture brush. It's created by a random sampling of the black and white stencil field displayed currently on the rest of the screen. The brush changes from instant to instant. Turn off the stencil, and painting with this new brush shows off a capacity for rapidly creating complex and subtle work. These are user-defined brushes. If you draw or create a new stencil pattern, you get a new brush. The highlight and drop shadow facility can be used to assign up to 3 colors to this kind of brush. Once again, Symbolics puts a powerful new tool in the hand of today's graphic artist. Our scatter brush does just that, scattering an image in either horizontal, vertical, or both directions. The extent of the horizontal and vertical scatter and the opacity of the scatter effect can all be set independently. This provides an extremely flexible tool for diffusion and defocusing effects. And the scatter effect can be animated and applied to an entire canvas. It's called image scatter. Once again, the symbolic effect is user-defined. PaintAmation gives the artist total creative control to customize the effect. These are some of the first applications of the image scatter effect. Image scatter is a good example of a set of tools the Symbolics calls operations. The Symbolics artist has highly refined control of dozens of operations like edge detection, area fill, and recolor.
So let me go into operations. And here we have several ways of recoloring things. I can do an intensity hue or saturation recolor here. I could do an RGB recolor. One that I like is the colorize based on grayscale. The reason I like this is that I can actually mix my own colors and paint with several colors at once. So let's start with kind of a cyan. And as I create these colors, I can deposit them right in my palette and actually mix in the palette. And these will become the colors then that I recolor with. So if I use that row of my palette as the source for the recolor operation, when I do this, basically that's the effect that I get. Now actually, I have something else in mind. I really just want that up near the top of the picture. So rather than painting with a constant opacity, any of the operations that I paint with can have varying degrees of opacity. And so here what I'm going to do is use a recolor with the blue colors that I've set up, but recolor using opacity over a gradient so that only the top portion of this gets recolored. It kind of fades out toward the bottom. What this is going to allow me to do is create another set of colors that I'll use for the bottom half. And I just reverse the direction of the gradient here by clicking on it, and I change the palette row. And say redo uses the exact same shape, but now I've filtered in the other colors to the bottom half. So here, quite quickly, you can see I've been able to create a picture that has both a wide range of color, but also very nice soft transitions between the colors. But the power of recoloring goes beyond being able to do something this bold. Its real strength is in being able to do very soft and subtle types of recoloring, something you might have to use on a daily basis, as mundane as it may be. Client came in with this picture and loved it. The sky was blue, the shirt was really nice red, but the face is a little bit too green. So this is a good example of how recolor can be used to maybe bring back a little bit of the red that should be there. Now, first I need to pull a stencil or a mat for the head so that we don't really affect anything else in the picture. We can do this a couple of ways. The easiest way is to read the luminance level of the picture or the chrominance level, as I'm doing here, and then just make a stencil from that. And I can actually go in and let me pick up another brush here. I can go in and paint out some of these big areas that need to be corrected. I also have the ability to pan and zoom, which allows me to go in and at a very low or close level, essentially, do really fine kind of retouching. Again, making that stencil just right for what we need to do here. Once we've got our stencil complete, we're ready to go ahead and finish recoloring. I've got several ways of recoloring. In this case, I'm going to choose RGB recolor because it gives me the most control over selecting a specific color, red, green, or blue, that I want to alter, and then doing various things with it. In this case, because we've got too much green, we want to remove the green. I can put it into a mode where I'm interactively going to set how much green to be removed. Because I've got the stencil off, it's affecting the entire canvas right now. But once we've determined how much green we want to remove and set the value, we can go ahead and turn the stencil on and then perform the operation. Of course, now it'll only affect that part of the canvas that's exposed. One of the really nice things about the system in general is your ability to unpaint and redo things. And so here, that looks like we've taken out a little bit too much green. So we can undo that, make some more adjustments. I've turned the stencil off here, and then redo it.
Symbolics recolor operations offer subtle control, flexibility, and speed that is unmatched in the paint system marketplace. And some of the Symbolics' most useful paint operations are available on no other system.
Another good example of how these tools helped on one particular project was this. A client came in and they had this picture of a map that they really liked and wanted to use it in a piece. But it had all of these lines, and we were going to have to remove them all. And we were going to start by frame grabbing this particular image. So we come over to the copy stand, and then frame grabbing it, we were able to then go ahead and begin removing the lines. And this is another example of how some of the features made this a very simple and fast job to do. In this case, I used a filtering operation called expand, which allowed me to quickly remove the small detail, the lines, etc., from the picture. By repeating this twice, I had completely removed all of the detail that the client didn't want in the picture. We then wanted to go ahead and put back some of the detail, such as the borders, though. So I went ahead and I did a quantize on it, which just gave me nice broad areas of color, and touched out some of the things I didn't want. Here are just a few little dots. And at this point was able to put back the lines using another really handy feature called Edge Finder. This is a keying operation that actually identifies regions of color and creates a boundary there. So by first doing this and then depositing that in my stencil, I was able to quickly paint back in just the borders. So this is an example, again, of how the tools that Symbolics gives the artist allows him to be more productive. Literally in less than 5 minutes, we were able to go from this image with all of these lines in detail to a final piece that the client was ready to use with just the countries and the borders.
Paste Up mode is a powerful tool for both image composition and the layout of 2D animation.
Paste Up mode is a new feature in the PaintAmation system that gives the artist the ability to lay out and compose images in a way that he's never been able to do before. Basically, each of the elements that you paint with, shapes or brushes in this mode, are independent of each other and can be moved around on the screen, copied, resized, repositioned. And the advantage is that none of the other elements that I've painted with already are affected. This means that if I have an image that has 5 or 6 or more levels, I can change my extreme background level or element without having to redo any of the foreground elements. In this particular case, I've taken one shape, copied it over several times, and used Paste Up to move and reposition and resize that one shape that I initially had. Now looking at this, it looks good. We're getting towards the composition that I want, but I need something for my foreground here. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off Paste Up mode here and look at what images I might have which would be suitable for a foreground. All right, here I have an image that I'm going to use as a foreground element. I can use a feature called copy operation to copy just a portion of that image into this scene that we're creating. When I reactivate my Paste Up, those elements will automatically place themselves back on the screen where I had laid them. There's really no limit to the number of elements that you put in here. So I want to add a logo to this. The logo was created by using the unified capabilities of this machine that combine 2D and 3D capabilities. I began by frame grabbing a logo to the paint canvas, and then I went into the geometry program and used a feature there called edge detection to create a 3D object from this. As a 3D element, I can then rotate it, scale it, move it around. I'm basically looking for a position that is going to work in my 2D composition. When I've found that, I can output this from the 3D environment back into the 2D program and then add it to my scene or my Paste Up. I can just open a slot in the layering and insert the brush where I want it. When I redraw my Paste Up then, I can position the brush and voila.
But Paste Up's flexible layout capability is just the start. For Paste Up mode is also the foundation of Symbolics 2D animation power.
We've taken a look at a number of different features and facilities in the system for creating a range of effects and looks. But the system is called PaintAmation for a reason, and that's because most of the things that I've shown you so far can be animated. A very common thing that we're asked to do is animate logos. So let me show you a very simple, quick example of how we might animate a logo using PaintAmation. What I can do is take any shape that I've worked with and paint it on the screen. I can place this in my Paste Up, change the color, change the position of the object, put that in my Paste Up as well. Think of these as keyframes in an animation that I'm building. Let's go ahead and do a third keyframe. Here I'm going to change not only the color, but I'm also going to skew it. So I can change its position, its size, its color. And I've placed all of these keyframes then in a Paste Up that I can use in building an animation.
Ken builds an animation sequence by installing his first sequence element. His paste-up keyframes automatically load in the order they were created. He then specifies the frame number at which each key frame should be displayed. Any number of operations can be animated simultaneously. In this example, Ken selects a background image to be combined with the key frames.
Last but not least, we're going to need to record this. So I'm going to go ahead and add another image type operation that's going to save our canvas. And again, here there are a variety of ways that I can save it. I can save it back into an image. I can save it to the Symbolics file. I could save it to the abacus, which is what we're going to do. I also could save it via S-Record, which allows me to save it off to a variety of different types of tape devices. But in this case, we're going to use an abacus. We have an interface to the abacus that is very similar to using its keyboard and actually supports segment lists. So I can actually just choose a segment that I've named, and I'll record into that section of the abacus disk. We're basically ready now to set up this animation and run it.
Once the animation is set in motion, the finished frames are recorded. This example took about 30 seconds to complete.
Let's go ahead and take a look at that now that we've finished it.
This simple example illustrates Symbolics' approach to 2D animation. Symbolics' power becomes evident as the animation becomes more complex. This animation adds luminance reversal to the moving letters.
This animation was created in much the same way as the original example that I showed you. We've created a sequence that has a group of keyframes for each of the elements that we're animating. So you can see here there's a group of keyframes that will animate the word paint, a group for the letter A, for the word amation, and for each of the elements that are animated. We can look at the individual keyframes for any of these elements by clicking on the bar. This shows me each of the individual keyframes that will animate the word paint in this case. The first frame being off screen, the second frame being up above the middle of the screen. And here I can just step through each of the positions that the word will animate to. By clicking on Animate, I'm able to start this sequence running. Here it's animating each of the elements for the frame, recording it, and then going on to the next frame. These frames are taking about 4 seconds each, and that means we'll be able to finish this 40-frame animation in between 3 and 4 minutes. Although the animations we've taken a close look at animate primarily text, there are many different things that can be animated. In addition to the text, I can animate the colors of things. Here's an example of an animation that used recolor in a very clever way to make it look like a flashlight shining into the forest. Any of the items on the menu can be animated, from the loading of background images, the panning of images, to the recoloring of the canvas and brushes. Quite simply, you can paint on the screen, recording your brush strokes, and that can become an animation in itself. Once that path has been created, you can take any of the brushes that you've got and animate them along that path. Here my original brush, but I can swap and use other brushes. Here going over the same path, kind of giving it a neon look, or something more bold. We're next going to show you automation. Similar to animation in the sense that there are many steps that will be the same on a frame-by-frame basis, but for some reason our artist may have to interact with the process. Rotoscoping is a good example of a process that could be automated. Several steps are the same every time you do a frame, such as grabbing it in, making a stencil from it. The artist then may paint on some of the picture, and then you record it. So automation deals with automating those steps that are the same on a frame-by-frame basis, but gives the artist control when he needs to do his thing. This is a good example of an animation that lent itself well to automation. Like rotoscoping, there are many steps that are the same and repeated from frame to frame. However, in this case, we begin with line drawings that are done on paper by a cell animator. The process that we use to automatically cut out, colorize, and then place this character over a background has many steps to it.
The sequence list makes it easy to set up complex automation. The computer handles the repetitive tasks and gives the user control when drawing or other input is needed.
Let's go ahead and see what this process looks like in action. So here I've begun it. It loads an image into the canvas. It's first going to pull a soft matte, then it pulls the second matte, drawing on the screen, and now it's given control to me. As the artist, I can now go in, do my area fills, choose another color here for our horns, teeth and eyes. And when I'm done with my area fills, I can give control back to the system so that it can go ahead, do its fine quality line drawing, and then ultimately drop in a background. There are many benefits to an automated process like this. It greatly simplifies my task as an artist by eliminating some very mundane things that I would have to remember, such as what frame am I working on, or what is the next step, or where am I going to record this frame. It also eliminates literally dozens of menu choices that I would have to make for each frame. And so, in addition to simplifying my task, it also speeds up the process.
For any repetitive paint process, from quick turnaround cell animation to high-volume diagrams and graphs to intricate rotoscope work, PaintAmation's automation gives symbolic artists a winning ride. And for the widest range of paint and 2D animation effects, Symbolics PaintAmation is the unified system solution. Symbolics XL Animation is a unified high-end 2D and 3D graphics production environment. Here's what leading international graphic artists have to say about Symbolics.
A lot of systems suffer from a style, if you like. If you watch a sequence, you can often say, oh, that was done on a so-and-so, or that was done on so-and-so.
Well, whereas with Symbolics, I mean, there's even a hard time sometimes telling whether or not it's computer animation or whether or not it's live video that's maybe had some post-production techniques on there.
With Symbolics, you can often make things look completely different. You can make things look unique.
When I first saw the system and fell in love with it very quickly, one of the reasons why is because it looked very flexible.
Where the system really shines is in the modeler, as far as being able to rapidly create stuff, you know, complicated things really quickly, more than any other system I've encountered.
You can build models and animate them very, very quickly indeed.
And the Symbolics had so many options, and the color palette was beautiful, and you could do shapes operations and do animation with the paint system.
I think the best thing about the Symbolics is the ease of use, the familiarity. It's very quick to get familiar with it.
What I'd say about the system really is that it does the simple things fairly straightforwardly, but if you want to do more complicated things, you're not limited by the fact that somebody's made it too simple for you.
Symbolics render has very clear texture maps and reflection maps compared to a lot of other renders out there.
You can set an animation going overnight, sure that when you come back in the morning, it will have rendered it. So subsequently you can get a good night's sleep. The amount of work we do has just been snowballing since day one. I mean, we're now faced with the prospect of having to get a third system.
Welcome everyone to Super 90, Symbolics Unified Graphics Production Environment Roadshow.
In the fall of 1990, Symbolics toured the U.S. showcasing its unified graphics production systems and highlighting the advantage Symbolics offers today's graphics producers. This demonstration tape features excerpts of graphic artist Matt Elson's live demonstration of Symbolics 3D modeling and animation. Its high-end power for advanced character animation, and its speed and flexibility to meet the needs of day-to-day commercial operations.
Okay, this example is scanned in from a Nike logo that I found in a Rolling Stone magazine. It was actually about the size of a nickel or something. And so I scanned it in and cleaned it up. I wanted to start with sort of a worst-case scenario.
Matt's first example illustrates how Excel animation tools can quickly create a 3D object from flat art.
So it was pretty dirty to begin with. Then it's been cleaned up in our paint system, and then we're going to turn this into a three-dimensional object. So we're going to edge detect it, and simultaneously we'll extrude it, and we can clean up the edges and do all sorts of nice nifty stuff to it in one pass. All right, so let's make an object with this. So I'm going to create one based on this black and white pattern that it finds on the color screen. And now we want to turn it into a three-dimensional object. Let's go to our main menu and we'll add a new object. We're going to interactively create one. And what we're going to create is down here. It's called an image object. Now, an image object is made from a paint canvas or an image in memory. Now, we have a choice of either one, so I'm going to choose a window, which is the canvas. Okay, we can threshold the image. We can set its minimum feature size. This deals with how often it will chop up a rounded edge to make polygons out of it, this sort of thing. We can also do some very nice detailing to it. Say we want to extrude it, we want to give it depth, so I'll make it 2 feet in depth. It's going to be 10 feet high, 10 feet wide actually, and 2 feet high.
Once the parameters have been set on a single menu, a click on the mouse begins the creation of a 3D model from a 2D image. Seconds later, the 3D object appears.
Okay, so here's our object, and we can move around it.
The Symbolics XL1200 with the frame thrower vector accelerator option boosts vector performance dramatically. Geometric operations now run nearly 20 times faster than on previous generation systems. Later, we'll see how to animate this logo. But first, Matt demonstrates a way to rapidly create a complex 3D object from scratch. Symbolics Modeler is the most powerful and flexible sculpting tool in the 3D world.
Okay, so let's add a new object and play around with this a little bit. Let's add a cube, and I can edit the entire object. I can edit individual faces or groups of faces. I can edit individual or groups of segments, or you can edit individual or groups of points. So let's take and start working on this object, and I'll cut these in the middle. Now, it's not visible what we did there, so let's turn the vertice display on for the object. Now we can see those points. Let's move around the back side, and I'll grab these segments. We'll cut those in thirds instead of half. Then I'll grab this top plane and cut it up. All right, so now that we've cut those faces up, let's pull back a little bit, and I'm going to extrude this top polygon, and now we'll scale it down, and then we'll move it back in space. Now let's grab a couple, one on either side. And let's look down on top of the object. We can look at the front, the side, the top, or the negatives of any of those. We'll pull the camera back a little bit, and let's extrude these out. Let's scale these down. Let's move them back in space. Here we go. And then let's grab this front face. We'll extrude it out. Now also, anything I'm doing interactively, I could be doing numerically. So I could give it a given amount to extrude by. In this case, maybe we'll say 20 feet. And we can scale it down. If I want to scale by a given amount, I can scale it down here. We'll scale it down to roughly 1/3. And we can extrude it again, in this case interactively. And let's collapse that to a point. Okay. Now, it's getting to look more plane-like, but we want to add a little more delta to the wings. So we'll grab the points on the leading edges, and we'll move those along an axis of Z here. Pull it out. And now let's bevel off the leading edges of the wings and the tail. So what we'll do is we'll aim the camera at a point right here at the base of the tail. And now, no matter where I turn the camera, I'm aimed at that spot. Let's truck the camera in. And here we can look at the tail there. Now I'm going to bevel this edge off, and it's important to notice what's going to happen in this area. Okay, so the system created a new face for us. It didn't leave a hole, it didn't leave a gap in the object that we then had to go back and seal up. And the reason this is because we use a winged edge polyhedral modeler. And what that mouthful means is that it's sort of like sculpting with a balloon instead of sculpting with individual shingles. We basically start with a single sealed surface, and then I can bevel it, cut it, pull it, push it, do anything I want to it, and it's like I can keep pulling on this balloon infinitely, okay? Instead of having to build all these little shingles or tiles and put them together. And so that means when I bevel off an edge like this, it'll automatically fill in a hole for me. I don't have to go back and now figure out where the hole is going to be and anticipate that and then sew that up and, you know, repatch it into the surface. So a lot of problems, or what would be, quote, problems, just don't exist in this environment. And there's a lot of benefits, one of which we're going to come to right now, which is displacement animation. So if we want to animate this object, we have a number of different ways we can do it. We can just move it forward in space. We can attach it to a trajectory, meaning we can inscribe a path in space and tell it to follow it and bank along. We can also attach displacements to it. Now, the first two of just moving it or moving it along a path would leave it as a rigid object. Okay. The third one, displacements allow us to maybe make its wings flap, you know, give it some energy, give it a little excitement, give it a little character. This is what Joe was talking about, putting character into your animation. Let me show you what I mean. First, we'll assign a displacement to this. We'll tell it to remember everything about its spatial placement and its vertex placement.
Symbolics displacements operate in the 3D world in some sense like keyframes in 2D animation. Although, as you'll soon see, displacement animation has unique capabilities. Matt creates his first displacement by interactively manipulating the model he just built.
Now what we'll do is we'll take and lift these up so it can flap its wings. Well, if we lift them up like this, that's fine, but it's still pretty static. It'll just be waving its little wings out at the end of its body without having any muscular involvement. So let's take and move them along an axis, but this time I'm going to invoke a spline-based modeler, and I'm going to affect all the way out to the tip of the nose. So now the body is much more involved in this action. And now we'll add just a little extra to the tips of the wings. Okay, so now we'll assign this as a new displacement.
Matt creates 3 new displacements which will be combined and animated to simulate organic motion. Matt's airplane will soon fly like a bird.
And I'm going to just move it forward there. And let's say this is another new displacement, phase 3. All right, so now that we've created this object and we've begun to animate it, we've set up to get ready for animation, let's move into the animation system.
S-Dynamics controls the movement of 3D objects over time. In this example of displacement animation, the camera position remains fixed and our object moves. The graphical script interface helps us see how displacements work. Here we can see 3 scripted channels. The top channel shows the combination of our original object and our first displacement shape. Remember that this was wingtips pulled up. As the graph goes up and down, the first displacement shape is added in both a positive and negative direction to our original object. The result? Flapping wings. The second channel is our second displacement, the nose pulling back, added here to both the original shape and the first displacement. So the nose pulls back as the wings keep flapping. Finally, the addition of the third displacement pulls our plane off the screen.
So now that the script has been recorded, we can play it back at any speed we'd like. We record bitmap files and then play those back because they give us the greatest flexibility. No matter how complex our scene, we'll always be able to have real-time playback.
3 simple states combine to create a complex organic motion, and the artist can work independently on each part of the motion, making adjustments to the animation easy. But the real power of Symbolics is that it lets you create animation scripts for simple objects, then reuse those scripts on more complex versions of the objects. To illustrate this, we make a smooth version of our plane and then run this complex object through the same animation we've just created.
Now we'll see the complex version of the plane going through its movements based on what the simple one did, but there's a lot more subtlety to the movement in this one because it's got a finer polygonal mesh on it. Okay, so now that that's finished, let's take and play it in a loop.
The Symbolics animation design process fits the human model. It allows the artist to start with rough sketches and move to smooth, finished animation, making interactive adjustments to both motion and models along the way. Here is another example of working from rough to smooth.
This is a version of a head talking. So here's the mouth talking. But we see it's a very simple polygonal mesh. It would be obvious, no matter how smooth the motion, it would be obvious that a computer generated this, and we'd like to avoid that. So let's go to a higher polygonal mesh, meaning let's look at the smoothed object here.
The key notion in displacement animation is that several displacements can be simultaneously combined or overlaid to create a single complex motion.
So let's take a look at exactly what they're doing as they overlay. Here we'll scroll this with the mouse, and on the top line we can see the mouth open and close and open and close and open and close. On the second line here, we can see the corners back, forward, back, forward, back. On the third line, we can see ooh, ooh, ooh. And on the fourth line, we can see a smile, off, smile, off.
From these four simple displacement states, we get some very complex motion because of the ability of the displacements to overlay one another. Next, Matt animated the individual letters of a Sony logo to demonstrate the power of the interactive sketch editor.
The sketch editor allows you to actually sketch your curves in time instead of having to define them procedurally or define them in terms of points of knots across a line or something like that. You can just go in and physically draw them out and modify them by drawing on them. And we'll put a little curve up here. And now if my drawing is particularly bad or something, I can run over it with a low-pass filter and smooth it out. I could maybe copy it somewhere else and then invert it for something to happen in conjunction with this. Or I can set different curve types on it. Here I'll set a linear curve. Again, I can draw on this at any moment in time and then smooth it out. We can set a slow in or a slow out or a slow in, slow out. We could do a bounce curve. So let's give this, say, 5 bounces. And so here we see a bounce, a bounce, a bounce, 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 bounce. So it's both becoming faster in frequency and less in power with each bounce. Here we could do a sine wave. Run a sine wave through something. We'll put 5 sines through that. Or we can do a dampened sine wave. In this case, let's just put 3 in. And we see them dampening out. This is exactly the kind of curve that we used for the swinging of the O at the beginning. So let's go back and take a look at that again. And if we zoom in on it, this has actually 2 sines through it. And if we scroll through this, we see the O starts, it moves, rocks the other direction, and then dampens out and stops in the middle. So now let's take a look at that playback in color.
The sketch editor allowed for rapid scripting of this logo animation. Matt's next example illustrates the benefits of Symbolics' unified 2D and 3D capabilities. We'll see the high-end look of the 3D Nike logo combined with the speed and efficiency of a 2D background.
Now that we have that as a 3D object, we can animate it in a number of different ways. And back up in our black and white here, I'll play this in a forward loop. I did a fly-on of this Nike and then landed it. And instead of having to figure out how much to move it in Z and X and Y and rotations and all this kind of stuff, what I did was I built a trajectory. And what's a trajectory? A trajectory is just a line in space that I inscribed and just said, start here, go here, go here, go here, and it just followed all along that path and automatically banked itself through the corners and that kind of stuff. And then there have been some displacements added to make it wiggle like Jello when it hits the end. Okay. The next thing we want to do with this is once we've seen this animation, we want to make a test render before we commit to rendering the entire thing out.
In preparation for this demo, Matt had performed a reduced resolution full-color test render of the animated Nike logo. The frames were stored in the Symbolics machine and can be played back in real time through the frame buffer.
So it's small, so it's rather pixelated, but it does give us a very complete idea of what's going on.
Test render completed, Matt then presented a fully rendered Nike animation sequence which had been recorded on an Abacus A62 digital disc recorder.
So this is a combination of two-dimensional and three-dimensional animation.
Tight integration of 2D and 3D production environments allows for speedy production of complete animated sequences.
So the Nike will pass behind these rocks and then land in front of it. So here, if we play this, we'll just play it forward, we'll play it full speed, and we have it flying out behind and landing in front of the rocks. There's also, if you notice, the color changes from the darker to its full gold. That's a recolor operation. It's just recoloring it so that it has some appearance of being in the shade behind those spires of rock.
From cost-effective flying logos to the frontiers of high-end character animation, the Symbolics Unified Graphics environment delivers flexibility and power. Matt's 1990 award-winning HD TV animation, The Little Death, introduced synthetic star the leopard-skinned Lotta Desire. Today, Matt presents Lotta with a new, more human skin. Her new smile made possible by Symbolics' advanced mapping tools. Symbolics mappers help place 2D texture maps like this onto 3D models like this. The power of Symbolics Unified Graphic Systems is this: state-of-the-art 3D tools combined with powerful 2D capabilities, which allow the Symbolics artist to tackle any job with a single integrated system.